Okay, welcome. This is now the fourth time I have attempted this. I am so sorry. I originally started this, and luckily I hadn't been watching the movie or anything yet. But I pushed, I pushed like you queue up everything, and then you say, "All right, we're gonna start in three, two, one, go." And mine didn't want to play, so then I had mic issues, and I think I figured it all out now. So we are going to officially get started this time. We are going to be watching Man of Steel. It is the first movie in the DCEU series. We're going to do a commentary track on it. I'm going to kind of talk through it with you, and you can watch it along with me, or you can just listen along if you're not watching the movie. There'll be some things that I'll be talking about that happen right at the moment, so that may be confusing. If you haven't seen the movie, please don't watch this. You'll be very bored. However, I am excited to get started. This is going to be the first one we do, and then we're going to move on with the other parts of the series as we go along. So I kind of talked about it with my last recording about my first opinions of this movie, and all I'll say is I'm not going to go into it again, but we'll talk a little bit more about it as the movie is going on. But I just wanted to first talk about, I did see it at midnight in 2013. I was super excited for it, really excited for a fresh new take on Superman. And it was definitely an interesting time because it was a clean slate. There wasn't a DCEU created yet, so that was interesting. Marvel was successful, but it was still in its infancy with its movies. Back in 2013, we were around the time of Iron Man 3, so we did have the success of the original Avengers, but things have changed so much since then. So this is a simpler time. I remember seeing the original teaser trailer, and it looked like the coolest movie you could ever watch. And that's one thing I really remember. It's a fantastic trailer, even to this day. I'll say that. But yeah. So without further ado, we're gonna get started. I'm watching it on the Blu-ray. You want to set yours to like absolute zero. My runtime says it is 2 hours, 23 minutes, and 2 seconds. So if you have that queued up, it's a completely black screen. And when I count down from 3, 2, 1, then we're going to get started and we'll watch it together. So if you have an iTunes version, if you have Vudu version, if you have a DVD, Blu-ray, whatever it is, get it set up and queued up. And we will get started here in just a second. I'm just letting some people, I know you'd probably pause this when you're getting it set up. I was also going to say when it comes to technical issues, obviously I've already had some and I haven't even started this yet. I apologize if any of those happen. I'm going to do my best to not make my voice sound like an ASMR, but I'm also going to make sure that there isn't too much in the background that you hear. I'm going to watch the movie with subtitles, which is kind of sucky just because I want to be able to listen to the music and everything, but it'll help when it comes to you guys being able to hear me talk while watching the movie. Also, I do have 2 dogs, so if you hear anything in the background, I apologize. That's just, my house. So, all right, let's get started. I'm ready to watch this. This is like the 4th time I've tried doing this, and I've just been wanting to watch the movie. So, set to absolute zero, pause at black screen, and we are going to start in 3, 2, 1, go. All right, so we got the Warner Brothers shield up. There might be a slight delay again just because it did back up as I got started, but we'll work with it. We'll do the best we can. It shouldn't affect too much because it's literally by just like half a second. I got the Legendary Pictures logo up. This is very reminiscent of like Batman Returns, or was it? Yeah, it was Batman Returns. No, the original Batman, 1989, where you're going through the different part of the bat symbol. This isn't the bat symbol, but it kind of reminds me of that. Also, if you just saw the DC logo, was the peel, is what they called it. The peel came out around the time the New 52 started, and I absolutely hated it. A lot of people liked it. I did not. I thought it was a little... I don't know. I just thought it was a little bland. It didn't look like a comic book company. It looked like something... It was an interesting design, but I love the new one that they have now. I call it like the high school logo. It's very it looks like a high school football team. So now we're looking at Jor-El and Lara as they're having Kal-El. I thought it was an interesting choice to cast Russell Crowe. When I heard that was the case, I was kind of thinking like, oh, Russell Crowe, that's kind of like a response to Marlon Brando because Russell Crowe's been in so many iconic movies. However, I think Russell Crowe has been in a lot more misses than Marlon Brando was when he was Jor-El. Marlon Brando is probably the biggest thing on the planet at the time, and Russell Crowe wasn't quite at that status, I don't think, but it was still fun to see, and I thought he was an interesting choice. I think he does a great job. There's a lot of controversy around Jor-El in this movie. Now we're getting to see the world of Krypton, which is very different from many other interpretations. It's very, it's like an ancient sterile is what I kind of think of it. It's, you can tell it's been around for a very, very long time, but it's also, I don't know, there's something very clean about it. As you can see in that last shot, it showed a little like shot of the landscape, and there's these curvy divots within the planet. And what they say in the special features is that's where the resources are being used the most. It's this interesting, like they've been digging for so long, now they literally have run out of resources from that. Get our first shot of Michael Shannon as Zod in some pretty badass armor. This Krypton stuff I love. I don't have any issues with this. I think a lot of people criticize Zod's plan, and they say it's very flawed, and there's a lot of things that he wants to do, but he doesn't really have an end game for. And I totally agree with that, and I think that is kind of an issue with it. However, I just think Zod's mentality is supposed to be flawed in general, no pun intended, because he was not born naturally, just like all the Kryptonians. That's why I even think, as much as Jor-El is right in this case, I think Jor-El is also a flawed character, because none of these characters that you see are naturally born, and I think that really kind of affects their their genetic code that helps them with morality and things like that. And everyone kind of talks about in the comics how crazy Jor-El can be, and how he kind of, even though he was right, he was also a little insane. And I kind of think that helps with the character of him. And I think that's also why people criticize Jor-El. If he wasn't naturally born and he was born with a job to do, he was a scientist, and then he's this big action hero. I think he also, these are things that aren't in the movie, but you could kind of come to the conclusion that he's been experimenting with all that stuff. And even though he's a scientist, he's been trying to break out of that mold, just like he wants his son to be naturally born and break that mold as well. You get this amazing shot from the trailer of him looking at the destruction. A lot of people say that Zack Snyder really cut out his style in this movie, the very slow-mo with, it has a distinct style to it. You see it in Batman v Superman. I do agree to an extent with that as well. However, you can still tell that visually the man knows what he's doing. I always kind of have thought of that. I think Zack Snyder is much better as a cinematographer over a director. And even if he was doing a movie he had no hands on the script, I think, and you had an amazing script writer, I think that would also help. He has really, really good intentions, and his stuff isn't just complete dog shit. I mean, it's not something that is just like, there's nothing good about it. He knows what he's doing, but when it comes to getting shots and things like that, I just don't think he just knows how to. I don't think he understands certain characters at times, and many assets of filmmaking. So that's where a flaw is. Now this is where the Kryptonian babies are born in these gene pool type things. These are actually, it's funny, as much as they changed a lot of the mythos of Superman, this is actually something that was talked about and discussed in John Byrne's retake on Superman's origin back in the 80s. So as much as this is very interesting and different, the birthing matrix is something that has kind of been around before. Now, one thing that I kind of wish they would have done a little bit more is they talk about this codex, right? And I really like the idea of the codex and how it's inside Superman, but you can tell it was so far out there that he didn't really know what he wanted to do with it afterwards. And I think that would have been a very good thing to bring back. Spoilers with the revival of Superman in Justice League. I think taking that and putting it as part of his the reason he's able to come back from the dead, I think that would definitely be a good tie-in to previous movies. Much more action-packed than the the Christopher Reeve Superman movie, Krypton with Marlon Brando. That's my least favorite part of that movie. I know a lot of people like that, but I just really didn't enjoy the very icy, sterile quality of Krypton in that, and the Shakespearean type language that they speak in. It just didn't quite do it for me. It gets a little boring. This is, I mean, it doesn't need to have as much action as this, like necessarily, but I just really like the color scheme, and I like the different creatures and animals. It really does feel sci-fi. Here in a second, we're going to get some Kal-El penis, which is always really awkward. It's just, I guess they just think it's a tradition of Superman movies now to show baby Kal-El's hang down, but I'm just a little too immature to just like look past that. I love this music. I'll talk about that as we go along, but Hans Zimmer's score is a very good response to the John Williams classic Superman theme. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it's better. I think it's the perfect score for this type of Superman movie. And I'm really, really sad that they did not use it in Justice League. They only used very small hints of it, and we'll talk about that when we watch that movie. But this whole talk here and him discussing his son and what he'll be like on Earth, and then they play that music behind it, it's very, very good. And I do remember I did get choked up during this movie when seeing it in theaters, and a lot of people laugh at that or scoff at that, but being as big of a Superman fan as I am, it was just, there are so many things in this movie that I personally was looking for. And I'm not saying everyone looks for those things, and I'm not saying it's one of those things that is like a general, like everyone's going to love this. But for me personally, growing up with all the Superman media that I consumed, there were so many moments that I've either never seen before that really added, or things that I've never seen before that I've always wanted to see from the comics. And some of that is just awesome. There it is. And this weird like metal that they use to create not matter, but to create structure and things is the weirdest thing. And it's not necessarily original, but it's an interesting touch. And growing up, I always hated the Superman S stemming from Krypton up until I got older, and I realized, not just from this movie, but from many other things, that I realized that it isn't an S, and they really make it an obvious point. Superman says it in this movie, but I was always like, how do Kryptonians know the American like alphabet, or that, how do they know what an S is? And it's not. And so now I like it a lot more. When I was growing up, it always bothered me, even in like the animated series, seeing that. You have Jor-El suiting up, which is interesting. It's interesting that they use um, like the Superman suit is almost like underwear. It's not. People say that and joke on it, but it is kind of. I mean, it's like chainmail underneath plated armor. Back in medieval times, it's like someone just wearing chainmail or something. It's very interesting, because they have this giant set of armor above it. But I think it looks really cool, and I think it looks really cool when Superman fights a lot of these Kryptonians with this armor. And it gives it a nice different touch to it. And people make a lot of fun of Michael Shannon in this movie, but about how he's very like screamy and everything like that. And I really like. For one, I love Michael Shannon in pretty much anything he does. I even like him in Kangaroo Jack. But I don't think people quite see. I don't think people quite see what they're trying to get at here. Zack Snyder's very good at having good ideas, but not communicating them well on screen. For me, I think General Zod in this is you're supposed to kind of take it as he's just so the way he was born has driven him to madness. And it's this whole movie is about finding your own destiny and finding your own path in life and not letting, where you're from inherently make you who you are. And that's where the big battle between Clark and Zod is Clark, from the moment he was born, is a person who has the idea in his head that he can do anything. He can be anything he wants to be, and there's nothing that's going to stop him. And Zod, literally from birth, is told, you are going to be this way, and this is who you are, and this is how you'll be, and these are the things you'll do, and this is how you'll be successful in life. And so I think it's that idea that no human should have that mentality or be given that mentality. And Zod has been living with that for so long in his life that it's driving him to just absolute madness. And as much as he believes in the things he does, it's one of those things where it's kind of tragic because he doesn't see that. So, yeah. And this is an interesting change, killing Jor-El before the planet explodes. A few days or however long it is in between. I think that's a nice touch. I always thought, man, what perfect timing to, launch Kal-El into space, seconds before the planet explodes. It's very dramatic and very cool and all that, but it isn't quite, it's just very convenient. So to change that is an interesting touch. I remember when we were seeing shots of, or when we were getting rumors of Michael Shannon as Zod, we knew he was cast, but we didn't see any, any shots of him or any character designs of him or anything. Everyone was going to assume that he was going to have kind of this Caesar cut haircut with a goatee. And I remember in an interview, he was like, they think I'm going to have this weird, like, Caesar cut haircut with a goatee. And then you see the movie and that's pretty much what he has. He doesn't have a goatee until years later, but he ends up getting pretty much looking the way we expected from him. But I think it fits. I just love Michael Shannon. I just think he can communicate without dialogue so easily, and it's really, really amazing to watch. But yeah, like this shot here of the ships, and I think that's the world engine and everything. It's so sci-fi, and I love that because Siegel and Schuster were inspired by these amazing sci-fi stories at the time. And they use that as a catalyst to create Superman. And their biggest fascination was taking something like so sci-fi and bringing it down to a human level and putting it amongst us in a time of need. And so the more sci-fi you get when it comes to Krypton or anything outside of Earth, when Superman goes off to a distant planet, I love that. That's something that I prefer in a Superman story is, if you're going to tell an outer world story, whether it's his origin or whether he goes and leaves Earth for a while. When, he's on Earth, I want it as human as possible. And I don't mean by grounding him necessarily. I mean taking a man who's not from here, who is so big and amazing, godlike, and making him more human than the rest of us. And so it just makes a nice stark contrast, that he's from this chaotic, crazy outer world, and as soon as he ends up in the Midwest, he's one of the most human of us all. Like, there's another one of those shots that just looks so cool to see. And I don't mind the whole crystal thing with the Dick Donner Superman movies, or the Christopher Reeve movies, whatever you want to call them. But I do like that they kind of give us a breath of fresh air with what someone sees Krypton to be. Even if it's not your favorite, at least it's not taking one idea and keeping it for 50 years or however long. I have this, I purchased this soundtrack a long time ago. And there are times where I don't listen to it too often, but there are times that I will listen to it, and a certain part of a track will play, and it'll choke me up because it's just really beautifully written. I love Hans Zimmer and pretty much everything he does. We'll talk about that more with Batman v Superman as well. But this movie, just, they really, I hate there's a balance that you got to go when it comes to this movie, is because a lot of people don't like, and I personally don't like, the idea of grounding Superman and making him real, or making him realistic, or making him relatable. Those are dangerous words to say at times when it comes to Superman, but there is a fine line between that and making very human, intimate moments with Superman. Those are the best Superman moments. Like I said, you have this guy who can do anything and is from this crazy alien planet and should in all terms be nothing like us. The only thing that they pretty much have similar is ideas, and they look like humans. But besides that, they're very different, and you would think when he lands, that's where the world has seen the alien race and is completely different. You can think of all the differences, but it's so touching to see how, if you're raised here, you become one of us, and sometimes even more. It's that speech that everyone talks about in Kill Bill. He's more human than us because he studied us, and we don't study ourselves. We just are us. We just are. Superman isn't, or Clark isn't, and since he studied us for so long, he's more human than the rest of us. And they got this Deadliest Catch meets Superman. That's what everyone calls it, but I like this. It's not really a montage, but this whole let's show Clark trying to find his place in the world, and literally everything he tries to do when roaming the world, he ends up helping people. And this is really just an excuse to be able to show off Henry Cavill's body, yes. But I don't know. I'm very mixed on that too. There's it's everyone's like, what do I see in my Superman? What do I want in my Superman? And I don't think there is a right or wrong answer to a lot of that stuff. I think it's a lot of preference, but my preference in Superman is I actually don't like Superman Arnold Schwarzenegger big. I kind of like him being like a Flash toned, tall, but just toned, because it shows that he doesn't really have muscle because he sits there and does 10 billion pull-ups every day. It's just his body is helped by our sun. And so I like Henry Cavill in this movie the most, I think, when it comes to his build size, because yes, he is very, very ripped. But when he's in a suit, he is muscular and he looks like Superman. And yeah, like I said, I like him a little bit. Like I liked Brandon Routh, like his size. Christopher Reeve, I liked his size. So yes, he is a little too big for my preference. But when it comes to the suit and when it comes to him in the suit, this is the best he looks. There are moments in Batman v Superman that I will point out where I'm like, man, not only does he have a lot of padding, but he looks like he can't even put his arms down to his side because he is so muscular. And that gets to me a little bit at times. Yeah, like these shots are just of his flashbacks and everything. I think they're just so beautiful. And these are the sweetest moments of the movie, are these flashbacks of him growing up and absolutely terrified with what's happening to him. And I think all of the kids in this are really, that play like the young Superman, this kid, and then I think his name's Dylan Sprayberry or something like that. They are fantastic, I think, in this. They really not only look like young Clark Kent, but this kid especially, he really shows all kinds of like true emotion and terror that a kid would have if he had these powers that were happening while he was growing up. Also, I really, one thing about Superman that I love, that I've always loved, not just in this movie, but in general, is that he's from the Midwest, because that's where I'm from. And it is very relatable. A lot of people don't think that's a big, if you don't live in the Midwest, people don't think that is a big aspect to his character. But, and I'm not saying everywhere outside the Midwest is awful. I'm just saying there is a certain culture here that is a little bit different, and that is a little bit more understanding and calm and caring, and at times. And without that aspect of the character, Clark would not have grown up the way and acted the way he does when he's an adult. Yeah, because his parents are the kindest people you could ever meet in life. And sometimes that's where some of my gripes with this movie are, is I think sometimes they don't quite represent that right or well. But Martha's really well done. Jonathan, I think is a little misunderstood at times when it comes to what he wants, but he's probably one of the bigger gripes I have, because that is what raised him. I mean, that is what has made him who he is. And that's why when you think of Superman, you think of everything good about a person. And it's not because that's just who he naturally is. It's because it's how he was raised. And being raised in Kansas is a massive part of his origin and his character. And there's all this biblical subtext. I mean, there's a million thesis videos on YouTube about this movie and about the Christian allegory and about the things that Zack Snyder purposely did for the house number and things like that. If you look up information on that, there's a lot to it. That's very cool and interesting, but I do not need that necessarily in a Superman film. It's just, I think comparing him to, Jesus or whoever so much kind of taints the character in a way, because I think it just makes him, comparing him to something that's already happened or existed or whatever is, I think, sometimes counterproductive. I think creating new reasons as to why someone is who they are is more compelling than saying, oh, well, they're not purposely, but unintentionally an allegory to this or an allegory to that. And that's my favorite insult ever, Dick Splash. Like anybody ever says that. But yeah, I like this kid too. He doesn't have a lot of dialogue, just like the younger version of Clark, but both of them really know how to show how they're feeling with their. I love actors who can portray a character without having to say a word, and he does say some things and whatnot, and there are many examples of that as well. But I really am a fan of someone who it's not what they say that makes them the character, or how they sound when they talk that makes them a character. It's everything else that makes them the character. Their facial expressions, their eyes, their movement. I mean, I think some of the best moments in any movie are moments with an actor that don't have any dialogue. Gotta love Pete Ross. Another character from the comics. See, and this is the thing, too. This is a really funny moment where it's an act of God, Jonathan. This was Providence, all these things, and it's kind of like, oh, no, maybe it's just because he's an alien. And then you throw in a lot of this this Jesus symbolism, and I feel like the message is a little mixed. I'm not trying to bash the Christian religion or anything or whatnot, but I'm just saying I don't understand why we can't have a Superman or a character like that and have to always, why can't we just, have him be who he is and not relate him to any kind of religious figure? And that's why I think that moment is very good, but I don't really understand why that changes or why there's so much in it. I don't know where Zack Snyder, why he wanted to, I guess because a lot of other people have done that in the past. And this is one of the most controversial lines from Jonathan. What should I do? Let him die? Maybe. I love Kevin Costner as Jonathan, and I think he's a perfect fit. The writing here is very back and forth for me. When it comes to Jonathan, he's the most controversial character for me in this movie. And for one, this isn't an original take on Jonathan. There's a lot of, not just a fully good-hearted man behind it. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of, believing in one thing staunchly. Like, in Superman Birthright, they have a Jonathan, not quite this degree, but he is also very scared and terrified of what his adopted son could become. And I think that, people think of Glenn Ford from the Dick Donner movie as the Jonathan that they think of. And I love that portrayal so much. And it is very perfect. But I don't think there's anything wrong with, in general in this movie, with trying to make some natural character choices or some natural ways that this would go around in real life. And I know that a lot of people don't like that. And I was just talking about that earlier with how people don't like to see Superman that relatable. They don't like to see his story grounded in reality so much. And I don't think it's as much as people think, but there are a lot of things that I do appreciate. I think it becomes more of a high detail than a bad decision, with the world reacting to someone like a Superman. What would happen if someone like Superman appeared in real life? How would people react? And I'm not saying that it would be 100% this, but I'm saying it is a cool thought to put into a movie. And with that, I think the reaction and the choices that Jonathan makes in this movie aren't inherently wrong. And I don't think they're out of character necessarily. I think it's a risk that was taken, and I think a lot of times it doesn't quite hit, but then at other times I really appreciate the thought put into it, because it's giving you something else to think about with these characters that have been around for now 80 years. And, see this whole moment here, and he would not tell Clark. He would not, and everyone talks about how they love the line of, I thought I was your son. And he says, you are my son. That's all amazing stuff. And that there shows that Jonathan isn't who people think he is in message boards. He is definitely at heart the Jonathan we know and love. They just tried to throw in some different ideas with him to try to give it a little bit more of a realistic impression. And I think like I said, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And the scene is great too. I think it's just this is a very relatable scene, not because of necessarily what Superman does or how he acts. It's just very relatable, running into some asshole that is like that. And this is another moment with Cavill this time where it's all in the reactions. It's not the lines. I mean, if you just look at his face and his expressions and his body language in this scene, it's very well done. And I think he's very underappreciated, and I think Henry Cavill has been given a lot of heat lately, and I think that's unfair, because it's not him that has a lot of issues. It's the writing at times. The moments that people don't like about Cavill are not him. And I think this is one of the scenes that shows that. His frustrations, but his learning to stay calm is just very well represented here. And that's actually the truck being in like the logs or whatever. That's actually kind of a nod, I think, to Smallville. I was just recently watching season 1 of Smallville, which if anybody has watched that show, man, it has not aged well. But there's a moment where Clark does something very similar. Now we're getting our first look at the new Lois Lane, Amy Adams, with red hair instead of black hair, looking a little more like Lana Lang. But I'm a big fan of Amy Adams. She's another one I think gets a lot of heat, and I kind of feel bad because it's both her and Clark, or Amy Adams and Henry Cavill. They are in all of these movies given very little dialogue, and I like that sometimes, but sometimes there are moments where they're just so quiet, or there's moments where they're so not even they're on screen and they're not talking. A lot of times they just don't have enough screen time. I think the screen time that they typically are given is very solid, and it shows how much I like their acting or how they're portraying the character. But for every good scene like that, there seems to be a scene that I'm like, man, I have some issues with either the dialogue, the writing of it, or the reactions that they told them to give. I'm one of the more controversial opinions I have about the Superman characters and Superman in the past is I'm not a massive Margot Kidder fan, and I know everyone says she's pretty much the definitive Lois Lane, and I do like Margot Kidder, don't get me wrong, but I don't think she's all that. If I had to say my favorite Lois Lane, it would probably be Lois Lane from the animated series is my favorite. She's the perfect balance. Amy Adams, if she's been given more meat to her scenes and she's given more scenes, just like Henry Cavill, I think that could easily have been swayed and turned into her being my favorite. They give her a lot of these I'm a tough woman that doesn't need, help with anything. I'm very out there for the story, and I love that about Lois's character, don't get me wrong, but sometimes I feel like it's a little shoehorned in with the dialogue, and that's definitely a David Goyer thing, who is a screenwriter for this movie. And can I just say, I don't think Lois Lane would ever use a Nikon camera. No matter how much product placement they give him in this movie. Now, I don't care about that as much as if I saw Jimmy Olsen using a Nikon camera. But let's be realistic. She would use a Canon. Now, this moment I do like. However, I feel like there's a little more that could have been done with it. I like. Don't get me wrong. I like the fact that Lois knows Clark Kent is Superman from the get-go. That is something that is very different, but it's also something that is very. It's a very good risk to take. I think sometimes in the other movies it's not executed as well as it could be. But I think that is a very interesting idea. It just skips that whole love triangle between two people. But this scene, I love that shot of the ship and him standing there. But this scene, the explanation is fine. But Lois being there and him, saving her from the robot and everything, sometimes, I don't know. I just feel like it's a little bland. There's something else that they could put there that would be a little more fantastical, I guess. But the ideas that they put in this ship, kind of as this fortress of solitude and things like that, I think is a nice touch. The only thing that doesn't make sense to me is they have, so this is technically supposed to be his fortress of solitude, which is also this massive mothership from Krypton, right? And that kind of is what becomes, it's where he gets his suit, it's where he gets the knowledge, it's where he gets the, he gets Jor-El, holographic Jor-El. But then in this movie, it flies again, and it crashes into the middle of the city, and it is used to create Doomsday. The spoilers. This is going to be spoiling all of the movies, by the way, just because I'm trying to interconnect a lot of it. So I apologize if I'm spoiling anything, but I'm going to have more too, probably. But it lands in the middle of Metropolis, and Doomsday is created by Lex Luthor through that. This is brought to you by Nikon. But they... and then in Justice League, I guess it's a deleted scene, but in Justice League, they show when Superman comes back, he gets his suit. And it shows where he gets his suit. He goes back to the ship and gets it. But then it shows him leave, and he's back in the Arctic. So I don't know if there's more than one ship. I don't know. Maybe that's something I'm missing. But I feel like the Fortress of Solitude as a ship, Kryptonian ship in the Arctic idea, is a good one. But I feel like they don't... I think they get confused on where things are at times. There's always this little Easter egg here of the open pod. There's all these dead Kryptonians in this. But then you look next to him and there's that open pod right there. And that's supposed to be Supergirl, I guess. Which, by the way, if they stop making Superman movies and make nothing but Supergirl movies, I think that is a terrible, terrible idea. And people give this movie a lot of crap. I was just talking about Nikon, and it's brought to you by Nikon. And people give this this movie a lot of crap for having a lot of product placement in it. You see it much later in the movie. And I actually, this isn't just for this movie, an excuse for this movie or anything. I actually really like product placement if it's done right. Sometimes it is a little ham-fisted, and it's a very, it's too blatantly obvious. And I don't think that happens too much in this movie. In the special features, they discuss how they really wanted things to feel real. They didn't want him to just get knocked into a random hardware store. They didn't want him to get knocked into some random building, that restaurant. They want it to be Sears. They want it to be IHOP. And yes, it's a good excuse to have some money, get some money and things like that. But I don't always think product placement's a bad thing. It's funny when you see, like, when you start noticing product placement in movies, you watch, certain movies like or TV shows, and you can tell they're sponsored by different phone companies each season, because the one season they have nothing but iPhones and MacBooks and things like that, and then the next year they have a Windows Phone with a Surface Pro or something, and that's always funny. But even the best movies, Into the Spider-Verse has a ton of Sony product placement in it, and I don't have an issue with it, because it doesn't stick out as much to me. I think some people actually look for that a little too much at times. This movie also had a huge sponsorship from Hardee's, where they had a whole commercial built around Superman in a Hardee's commercial, and there's no Hardee's product placement in this. And then you have, can't remember the dude's name from Law and Order SVU. And sometimes that's one thing in writing, not just this movie, but in a lot of others, where I don't like certain characters that just kind of appear and they are a big part of the movie, and there's really no specific reason. They're just part of the plot, and they stick out to me. They kind of stick out, and I like him in it, and I think he's an interesting character. But like, it's such a random idea. Lawrence Fishburne as Perry White, which I thought was an excellent casting choice when they first announced that, because I love him and he's very fitting. And I know he's predominantly white in the comics, and I don't know if people had issues with that or not with this movie, but this is actually a character that I love the idea of. I mean, it doesn't matter, but I love, he's just a good actor, and he just is very fitting. There are some times where it's very blatant, like, I want this African American actor to play this part, and it's like, do you think it's because they're going to bring something new to the character, or is it because you don't want to whitewash a movie? And I'm up for diversity in a movie, but when you got to make sure you do it right, because if you just do it for the sake of doing it, it doesn't add anything to the character, and it actually makes that idea stick out. Just like product placement, it makes that stick out as the studio wanted to do this, and now it sticks out and it doesn't feel natural. But Lawrence Fishburne as Perry White is a very good example of diversifying the cast, but also doing it for the right reasons, and doing it because the actor is just a very good fit. Now, when I saw this whole Jor-El as a hologram thing, especially later in the movie, I thought, like, that's too much. Like, he doesn't need to know his dad that much to where it's just like he's face to face with him. My favorite part is when General Zod destroys the piece of whatever it is that would basically completely deletes his memory file, so he can't be a hologram anymore. I was like, oh, thank God, because nothing would be more irritating than him being in every single sequel, giving him more advice. And then in the rest of these movies, Henry Cavill, whenever he appears as Superman, he just doesn't have the look that he has in this movie. Not only with the suit, I think this is the best suit out of the movies in the DCEU, but also his hair, his build, like, it's the best version of Henry Cavill Superman you'll find will be in Man of Steel. Obviously in Justice League he has a lot of CG to his face, which is kind of irritating, and then his suit isn't filmed correctly, so in Batman v Superman he's a little too bulky, and his hair is like slicked back, and I'm not a fan of it. It looks like has a receding hairline, which he does, but it's more prominent. I liked it in this when he had, not only with his suit, but his hair was the best, I think, and his, like I said, his build isn't just ungodly enormous unless he has a shirtless scene. When you look at him in later in the movie in the suit, and then you see him earlier in the movie coming out of the water, and he's just like massive. You're like, that body did not fit in that suit. He totally had to lose that muscle the next few weeks to get fit into that suit. They just wanted to show how muscular he is, but he obviously looks a little bit smaller the rest of the movie, which is better for me, or in my opinion. Ooh, that the whole ship closing and flying away out of the metal stuff that moves, that was not very that CG did not age very well. Most of the CG in this movie looks really good, but that was very jarring. Yeah, and this is where they talk about, the birthing matrix, and what if the child dreamed of being something other than what society intended, aspired to be something greater. Those lines are telling us exactly what I was talking about, which is you can't sit there and look at the reasoning behind some of these Kryptonian characters, because they're, all of them to an extent, are driven to a certain insanity by how they were told to live. In that case, especially Zod. But this talk is really good. I thought the way he gets a suit is a little lazy. I wish there was a little more explanation to it, because it's like, has that just been chilling there for thousands and thousands of years? And I think that is the point, and that it's just the Kryptonian like chainmail, but it's so obviously like unique compared to the rest of the suits. So it's like, I guess it's supposed to be the formal wear, the formal garments, but I just wish they gave a little bit more to him preparing to be Superman. Like, it just shows this, and then he just opens the door and he's Superman, and he's in the Superman suit. He's not quite Superman yet, but he's in the Superman suit, and it's like, wish there's a little bit more. But to be fair, in the Dick Donner version, they don't explain that either. They literally just show him younger, and then they show him as a young Clark, and then it flashes forward 20 years, and he's in the suit and he's flying. But I love this scene. This is most people's favorite. Look at that shot of him walking. That's so cool. That shot, I like him coming up. I wish they didn't show his face, because he obviously, you can tell they're like, we just need you to walk towards the camera, and that looked a little off. But the rest of this is really. And I remember, too, there's a big controversy. They didn't do this with the other movies, but there's a big controversy about his chest hair sticking out of his suit, and everyone's so irritated by that. And that's such a stupid thing to even think about. But I remember Zack Snyder had just kind of a dumb reason of, oh, yeah, well, there was one comic I read where he doesn't have a shirt on. He's super hairy, and I just wanted to kind of give a little nod to that. And it's like, why? I mean, it's whatever, but I don't care. But it's such a random thing to think about. But yeah, this whole scene, this is some of the most accurate like comic book Superman you'll see in this movie. And I'm not using that as a diss. This movie is not. You only see glimmers of the Superman he will become. Everyone thinks that, oh, he has the suit now, he's Superman. Like, he's going to be exactly the way he's supposed to be. He's going to be like Christopher Reeve. This and Batman v Superman, I have believed from the beginning, he is not Superman yet. He is Clark Kent learning to become what will eventually become Superman. And moments like him smiling as he flies, and a few other moments where he's saving people and things like that. You get glimpses of it, but he hasn't become that yet. And if they would have just shown that a little bit better in Justice League, you see that he is Superman in that movie. And everyone's like, it's so jarring. Oh, obviously everyone hated how mopey Superman was in these movies, so they changed him in Justice League. And it's like, maybe that's the case, but that's exactly the movie I was expecting him to be that way anyway, because this movie, he's struggling with figuring out who he wants to be and what kind of person he wants to be, and getting used to his powers and not quite understanding the responsibility behind him. And Batman v Superman these are the repercussions of a person like him being in this world, and and having to understand that no matter what choices you make, there's always going to be some issues with that. There's always going to be something bad happening. But that is such a great scene. So good. But then, he when he sacrifices himself in Batman v Superman and dies, that is the moment he is Superman. That is the moment he becomes Superman, because he realizes, if I show the world how much I care, and the world sees how much I care, that will get rid of the issues I have inside me that are dividing me and having me try to figure out what I want to do and who I want to be and how I'm going to deal with these issues. And so then you see him in Justice League, and he's Mr. Smiles, going around just saving people and being amazing. And that's the route I was expecting it to take. And yeah, it was a little jarring because the vision kind of broke apart as they went along. But from the moment I saw Batman v Superman and I saw this movie, that's when I was like, yeah, he's not Superman yet. He's learning, and you will see a movie eventually where it will be the Superman people are looking for. But everyone, I feel like, got a little impatient and was like, well, I just want to see Superman as he is, which is a fair gripe. But like I said, that's what I liked about these movies, is they're at least trying something different. They're taking risks. They're taking these characters that are 80 years old and trying to add natural spins to them. Are they always successful? No, but at least they have some of that, That's why people didn't like Superman Returns so much. I mean, there's a lot of issues with Superman Returns, but one of the main ones is it's a rehash of the Dick Donner movies, and it's just like a retelling in modern day, and not as good of one. And that's what they tried to do with this, is not do that, and take really accurate elements from the comic books, and then take some natural thoughts behind these characters and what makes them tick and what makes them go down these paths, and they try to add a little extra to them and a little difference to them, and I appreciate that. I don't know why Henry Cavill has like a little overbite in this scene. It's like a very British overbite. Now, this scene is probably the most I have a gripe with, and this dialogue scene on top of it. This fight seems very forced, and this is where it shows Jonathan some colors that I don't understand, but also this whole reasoning behind how he dies is probably my biggest gripe in the entire movie. When I saw it in theaters, I loved it. I was like, oh, that's so like inspiring and sad, and it's not, because and the more I thought about it, I was like, there's nothing that you can do differently with this that happens that is stronger than all these things I can do, all these powers, and I can't even save someone. Superman has all of these powers. He has all these amazing godlike powers. He can do anything, but the one thing he cannot control is the death of others. And it's so poetic that a person so strong and so, like I said, godlike, his dad dies of a heart attack, which is an uncontrollable situation for him. And it's a big, massive life lesson to him. And that's such a beautiful concept. And they took it with them through the comics, in Smallville even, and everything like that. And because it's so good. And in this, I see what they were trying to do in a way. I see they're trying to find something different, or they're trying to keep hammering that message of, hide because the world isn't ready for you yet. You'll know. But let's be honest. Superman could have saved him, and no one would have even known it was Clark. Clark could have easily. How many times have there been an excuse of Clark saving someone in broad daylight in front of so many people and just saying, like, oh, I got flown by the tornado and it pushed me over into this ditch. You guys just didn't see me. I don't know what happened to Dad. He just got, like, he must have saved himself. Like, there's so many ways that this does not hit the chords that they were looking for. I am happy they saved the dog, though. One of my least favorite things in a movie is when they kill off a dog. I just can't stand it. And, like, yeah, it's emotional to an extent with kind of certain aspects, but this whole him waving him down just does not work. It just doesn't, because even if he's that young, he knows he can do it, and the world would not have seen it. There's so many moments in the comics where Clark does something when he's younger in Kansas, and they just chalk it up to, the mysteries of the Midwest and the farmland. There's, just like the crop circles or anything like that. But the emotion in Henry Cavill's acting here is very good. And the big argument a lot of people give too is, he's convinced that the world was not ready then. There needs to be a specific time and place for him to show who he is. And for some reason, this time is now, but there's they don't give any reasoning as to why he had to wait when he was younger. And the only thing I can kind of think of is, I think that he kind of goes against his dad's wishes in the end. I think his dad would have always told him to wait if he lived. And he goes to the church and kind of talks to I think it's the priest or whoever, and he says, what do you have? What are your thoughts on it? And he's like, what does your gut tell you? Sometimes you got to just do it and hope that people will go with it. And that kind of tells me that, I think that he is, in the end, he's been sitting here doing this undercover because he's trying to respect his dad's wishes. And in the end, he realizes, no, I need to be who I am, because I got to have faith in humanity that they will follow me in that. That also kind of breaks down Jonathan's character a little bit more too, because Jonathan doesn't, it does sound like he's like, well, eventually you can become Superman or whoever, eventually you can do these things, but not right now. But I don't know. Like I said, the Jonathan stuff is my biggest gripe with this movie. This moment, though, is wonderful. And that's another moment in Justice League that I like, is not the discussion with Lois, because that's when he's wearing a really bad wig and he's got the CG mustache, but like when the moment where, they tell his mom that he's alive and she comes out and they see each other, that's a very sweet moment as well. And like that's some great acting too. The whole, she is truly happy that he figured out, but it would be hard because that's, at the time, she's been convincing herself her whole life that we're his parents. I mean, there's no way around it. I mean, there's no one else raised their hand and said, no, actually this is mine, this is my kid. And to finally him to finally figure out who his parents really are is kind of a sad moment for her, and that's pretty relatable, I think, for a lot of people. She has some zingers in this too. They don't talk about, there's not like just straight up jokes. It's not like a Marvel movie. There's straight up jokes, which I appreciate and I like in those movies. But there isn't a lot of that in this movie. But there are some funnier moments later on. And a first look at General Swanwick, who does appear in Batman v Superman as well. Good actor. Another character that is like, there's a lot of just side characters in this that are very random, and they have very random, like big random parts in it. And for some reason, they really stick out to me. That happens in the Spider-Man movies from time to time, the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies. And it's like you have these movies with all these comic book characters, and then, Swanwick is in the comics too, but and so is Emil Hamilton and all that. But just to have some of these random characters have so much to do is kind of weird. But yeah. And I remember that, is it Jenny is her name? I think everyone thought that she was going to be like a female version of Jimmy. And everyone was like, oh, what a worst, like, that's like the worst take ever. And then you find out who the real Jimmy is, and it's like, oh, that's not any better. But like this whole like invasion thing is super well done in my opinion. This whole, like, he sends a message to Earth and like the invasion, it seems pretty real for me, like personally. Like it's a certain take I could see being made in real life if aliens ever really did come. But like, yeah, this is all really cool. And I remember they released this video before the movie came out, and it's before they showed any clips of Zod. It was like one of the first things that you ever saw of Michael Shannon as Zod, and it's all in this corrupted distortion of the TV, and it was the coolest, most badass thing. I remember I was in college at the time, and I was like, oh, that is so awesome. And for a second, it turns into a slight horror, gives like a slight horror vibe. But yeah, I was like, oh, this is going to be the greatest movie of all time after I saw the You Are Not Alone like campaign trailer. Like I was like, oh my God, so cool. Because I loved what's his name, who played Zod in Superman 2 and in Superman 1. His name's escaping me right now. I usually know it, but you know who I'm talking about. I loved him, but I always thought he was a very over-the-top, kind of cheesy villain. And Michael Shannon doesn't really scare me as Zod, but he is a very different take that I really kind of like. And the madness that he goes through is like, that final fight I'll go into later, but the reasoning behind that fight, I think, makes more sense if you actually think about it. That's another thing that I do defend in this movie, is that last fight scene. And a lot of people don't like it because of the crazy destruction porn that they put into it. But that is all, in my opinion, purposeful. I think it's all for the story, and it's to show if someone like that really came into this world, even if we had a Superman defending us, it would not go as smoothly as it does in the comics. I know everyone's like, well, these are an escapism. That's all well and good, and I love that, but that doesn't mean we have to tell that in every single version. I don't see why that always has to. There's no tradition behind that. There should be no tradition in a comic book. There are traditional qualities, but there shouldn't ever be a traditional way things play out. And, some people will chalk it up and say, well, that's just bad writing. It's not because it's played out wrong, like different than the comics. It's just not well written. Yes, at times that is true, but I think you need to give it credit where credit's due at times as well. Yeah, this must have been sponsored by Nokia as well, because that's the second Nokia I've seen as well, along with a couple other product placement moments. That's always phones and laptops are always the moments where I'm like, you got to have something, but there's no way to keep that subtle all the time. This is the only moment in the movie where I think there's too much shaky cam, is her running down this alley and then the car pulls up. Like a lot of people say there's too much shaky cam in this movie, and I don't notice it all that much. But that is the moment. I remember in the theater, I was like, I don't get sick when that kind of stuff happens in movies. That's the first time in any movie that I've been like, whoa. And like, I love this moment in the church. I do really like. I think it's a very Clark Kent thing, but it's so the way it's shot with him in front of Jesus and things like that. It's too obvious. This is a good moment too. Another flashback. I remember for a while this was the highest rated DCEU movie, which isn't saying much because it wasn't rated well. But out of all of the DC early between this and Batman v Superman and Suicide Squad and Justice League, this one I think gets the most unnecessary hate. I think the other movies have a lot more gripes that I understand and that are definitely a preference thing. This one, I think, gets a lot of unnecessary hate, and I think it's because there are moments, if you're not a huge Superman fan or anything like that, it can kind of probably be a little boring to you, and it can probably be one of those things that you're expecting one thing and you got something else and you don't pay attention. And I think a lot of people like to defend Batman v Superman and say, the reason you don't like this movie is because you don't understand it. You don't understand what they're trying to do. And I don't think that is quite a fair argument. I think that there's a lot of things that people understand. It's just not as compelling to them as people think. This movie, however, I think isn't so much of that. I think it is a lot of, I think people dismissed it after seeing it the first time and thought, oh, that was boring. I was expecting it to be more like a Christopher Reeve movie or a Marvel movie, and it wasn't. And of course, I'd love to see a lighter taken Superman movie, and I think they would have done that if they gave Henry Cavill a chance. But they kind of just dismissed it, and they're like, I bet if you go up to someone and say, have you seen Man of Steel? They'll either say no, or they'll say, yeah, back in the movie theater, I didn't think it was that great. I haven't seen it since. But it's definitely a movie that if you watch it and you really try to take it in from a different level than going into it thinking, this is a big, bombastic Superman movie, there's a lot of really good moments to it, and there's a lot of really good involved with it. And I don't know. I think people just kind of dismiss it more than they should. When it comes to Batman v Superman or Justice League or Suicide Squad, I understand those a little bit more. But oh yeah, sometimes you have to take a leap of faith first. The trust part comes later, and that does happen. He takes a leap of faith, shows himself to the world, and then the trust part doesn't come until he basically sacrifices himself in Batman v Superman, and then that's where we get Superman in Justice League. And people are so distracted by his CG mustache or his the choppiness of it because they had two different directors and things like that. But if you look at Justice League as a continuation or an ending to Batman v Superman, it does make sense for that. At least its character arc. It's not as jarring as you think it is when he goes from this Superman to such the happy Superman in Justice League and just happy to be Superman. He loves it. The editing is what makes that kind of jarring. Now, this scene, I love the dialogue and everything, and the acting is great, but this is the one scene where I'm like, it needs more color. It's so gray and blue, and kind of washed out. Like, this is what makes the suit look so gross. But once you get to the Smallville fight, that's where I don't have any gripes, and I'm like, that's the perfect. Or even in the Kryptonian ship with Zod, like all that stuff, his suit looks really good. But in this, you're like, man, they really muted it. That suit is not as muted as it looks in that scene. It's the brightest, one of the more brighter scenes that you see it in, so you would expect it would show it the most. But he muted those colors so much that it looks like that's how the costume is supposed to look. And even in this movie, when you go to other scenes, you'll notice, oh no, it's not as... I mean, go look at set photos from this. Look at set photos from the Smallville fight, and you'll see him walking around, and it is red and it is blue, and you can see the yellow sticking out. But I think when people think of his suit being so dark, they think of this scene, and then they think of Batman v Superman, where he's always in the dark. Even though it's brighter, he's always in the dark or in the rain. But I do like the dialogue, and I like the acting and everything for that, and the philosophy behind it and everything. But even there, like, that's a really bad editing moment. I remember even in the theater, I was like, ooh, that is that was jarring. They needed something to fill in that little chunk of him being in the interrogation room and then back out in the desert. That just was too jarring of a transition. But even in this, his suit looks a little bit better. Because you got that more of an orangey light from the sky and the sun and everything. But in that interrogation room, it looks almost black and white. But that looks... I mean, yeah, it's a little darker of a blue. It's a little bit of darker. But look at it looks a little bit brighter there. And the yellow, they do bring out the yellow more in Batman v Superman. Like I said, you can't tell because it's all in the rain or in the dark. But it does look a little bit better here. That's a cool shot, too, of the ship coming down and just him by himself in front of it. The thing I do also appreciate, which they've done in more than just, like, say, this movie, but they've done it in some of the Transformers movies and things like that, is they've had real U.S. military play parts in the movies. They don't have just an actor dressed up as a soldier or whoever, in the background doing something. And that's when a lot of people are like, well, that's not realistic. That's not, when I was in the military, that's not how it would happen, or they would not be able to do that, whatever. There's a whole special feature in this about how he had actual military personnel play these parts. And especially later in the movie, it does show, it definitely does. I mean, the actors are the actors, they're in costumes, obviously, but all of the background, military is someone. And I think that shows not only respect for our servicemen and women, but I think it also that's a really good touch to realism and things like that. And I think it was Transformers. There's a couple Transformers movies, like the original and a couple like that, I'm pretty sure did the same thing. And I hope more movies do that. I don't remember that actor's name, but the guy playing Emil Hamilton, I really like him. I love the character of Emil Hamilton. I was first introduced to him in the animated series, and he is a comic book character as well. The suit looks really good there too, by the way. But I really like that character, and I was really disappointed to see that he kind of makes a sacrifice in this movie where he may not have died. They act like he does. He gets sucked into the either not the Phantom Zone or I don't remember. But I don't remember how he exactly goes, but he doesn't make it, and that's something where I think if they really wanted him back, they would introduce him again by bringing him back. He would know more because he's seen all this other stuff, and maybe he'd be a villain. But I think he would have been a nice touch to Batman v Superman if he was still around and he was helping out in some form or fashion. There he is with the goatee. He looks exactly how I saw fan pictures of him. And I remember Michael Shannon was denying it for so long, and then you see a picture and I'm like, he looks just like he did when people imagined it. Like he has a really high cut, like he has kind of almost a bowl cut. He doesn't have sideburns. Don't get me wrong, it looks cool. It's what I would imagine Zod to look like as a Michael Shannon, but it's just funny. I also really appreciate that they don't use kryptonite in this movie. They don't even introduce it or anything. They don't really show hardly anything. This is all due to the atmosphere, which they don't use enough. The weakness is, Superman isn't unbeatable, and a lot of times they just use kryptonite as a crutch to show his weakness, but you can show his weaknesses in many other ways. They did that very well in Superman the Animated Series, which I've mentioned a few times now. It's one of my favorite interpretations, but one is, red sun, different atmospheres that doesn't have yellow sun, someone who can hit hard enough, and magic. He has a lot of weaknesses, and it depends on how hard you hit him. So I appreciate that in this movie that they didn't do that, and then they introduce it in Batman v Superman, and more or less I like it the way it's used there. And eventually, you got to introduce it. It's a big part of his history and mythos. But sometimes I feel like it's overused to show a weakness in Superman. So that's one of my favorite aspects of this movie is Superman it's not like he just has this moment in the movie where he's been successful this whole time and all of a sudden they give him some kryptonite and then they do a bunch of bad stuff and then he has to go clean it up. That doesn't happen in this movie. The weakness in this movie is him having the confidence in himself to stop these people. And you have to remember, Zod was in the military and Clark was raised on a farm, and he may have these really great powers and he may be really super strong, but he doesn't have the tactics that Zod does. And so it would be like, if I went up against a Green Beret to stop something, or a black belt in Taekwondo, and I got in a fist fight with him, but we were the same build, had the same muscle mass, had the same everything, but I didn't have those skills, that would still hinder me a bit. And so in that final fight with Zod and Superman, I think people forget he just is learning his powers. He just learned how to fly like a day ago. He's had this strength, but he's been suppressing it for so long. There's going to be destruction, and there's going to be a lot of mistakes on Clark's end, and it's not purposely, I'm going to throw him into a building to stop him. Which doesn't happen, but it's more of I'm just trying to do what I can to any way possible to stop him. And that kind of also leads into the conclusion of the movie as well, but we'll get there when we run into that scene. And for people who say, we never got to see a black suit in Justice League. No, we didn't, but we did see a version of the black suit in this movie. I also love that he's wearing a Kansas City Royals t-shirt. People give that scene a lot of grief too, that nightmare sequence. Or this nightmare sequence that's going on here. People give it a lot of grief and go, oh, it's so dark, and I want to see him, get buried in a pile of skull. I mean, read any Superman comic, and you'll find these really dark tones to him in it. I don't see why this is an issue in the movie. The suit here will look really bright because the lighting's a little bit better, and also you just saw him in that black suit. So in a lot of this ship stuff, his suit looks real good. The only reason I mention it a lot is because that's one of the bigger gripes I still hear about, is how dark and annoying his suit is in this, and muted. And it's not as muted as you think. This movie isn't as dark as you think. Everyone talks about how this is like the Dark Knight. This is, compared to Batman v Superman, this is like cheeseball. They give that guy a lot of dialogue too. He's the one that says Superman. I don't know who he's related to, but that's another, those kind of things are where I'm like, that's such like a Sam Raimi Spider-Man thing. The other thing I like about this too, now that I'm looking at it, is I like the S more in this. The thing that I loved when they first revealed this suit in the promo picture is I was like, oh, it's not like the really copyrighted, like super like used in everything S. It's not like just this really boxy diamond. Like, it seems so robotic and so generic. They kind of went back and gave it more of like the almost the George Reeves kind of flow to it, and I appreciated that, because for the longest time in the 90s and early 2000s, the S, they made it so standard, and it was so, they didn't ever change anything about it, and it started to become more of a brand than it did, like the Nike logo, than it did an actual meaning. And for them to change that in this was a nice touch. I mean, they did that in Superman Returns as well, but the thing I didn't like about that is I liked that suit for the most part. The thing I didn't like is how small the S was. I like on Superman in his costume, personally, I like a big S. Sounds punny, but I like how it takes up almost the entire chest. I don't think it's something that should be hidden. I don't think it's something that should be smaller. It's a big aspect to his character. And for a while, I know they had to have every character had to have something like Superman, something on their chest, whether it was the Bat logo or the Flash or Green Lantern or whatever. But Superman's has a good reason. So does Batman's. Batman and Superman mainly. Even Spider-Man doesn't necessarily need a spider on his chest. He doesn't. I mean, he just has it because it became kind of a tradition of superheroes to have something that represented their character on their chest. But if you know, for some reason someone wrote a story without the spider on his chest, it wouldn't ever throw me off. I think it ties it together very well. But I'd never be like, well, why don't they have that? Like, why? Like, it's supposed to be there. There's no reason why it's supposed to be there. For Superman and Batman in particular, even Flash wouldn't necessarily need it, but Superman and Batman in particular, you definitely got to have that. Batman, uses it as part of his symbol, and also it's what people go for when they shoot at him. It's more of a distraction than anything. Superman, it's literally his family crest. It represents his family and what they wore on Krypton. And this is another scene that people have gripes with, where he's telling her what to do and where to go. And yeah, it's a little much, I would say. I would say it's not necessary, and it's a lot of Jor-El that should not be in this part of the movie, but I don't hate it so much that it breaks the movie for me. It's not like the Jonathan Kent scene. That's a good shot of him breaking the chain there. This is a strong part of the movie where he, you can save them, you can save all of them, and then he goes after her. It's a really good saving Lois moment. The one thing I didn't like is Lois screaming the way she did coming out of the pod. The very generic woman screaming out of terror. I don't think Lois would do that. Especially this Lois. I think she would just kind of be like freaking out internally over screaming. I don't know. I just don't see her doing that. I don't see this version of Lois doing that, but the rest of this is fantastic. This, it's another Jesus moment. That also is unnecessary, but this part, Superman saving someone it always gets me going. He does a lot of saving in this movie, and he does in Batman v Superman as well. People they dismiss it because it's such a common occurrence with Superman. He saves so many people that if it's even slightly less than what he usually does, then he doesn't save anybody. But especially in this movie, you'll see in the final battle and in the Smallville battle, he does a lot he can to save people. Does he think of the overall numbers? Not necessarily, but whatever he has to do to stop this force that could very well beat him, you don't think about that stuff. But yeah, I love the cape in this movie too. The way Zack Snyder was very particular about how it moved and things like that. There's a lot of good behind the scenes stuff on that as well. There's actually on the Blu-ray version of this, there's a second disc where they do they pop in during the movie and talk about stuff, and there's a lot of good moments in that. They show some behind the scenes as the movie's playing. It's really awesome. You can't get it on the 4K version that comes with the Blu-ray because it's on the second disc of the Blu-ray, so you got to have the actual Blu-ray version. But there's a moment where they show Zack Snyder purposely moving the cape the way he wants it and stuff, and that's always an interesting thing to watch. She's pretty badass in this too. I think she's very underutilized. I think she would have been a good character to return because she doesn't die. And they still very well could do that. I doubt it now that they're not really focusing on Superman, but she's fantastic. She's a very good. She's almost tougher, pretty much tougher than Zod, and every time she's on screen, she's very. She shows a lot of energy. I like that. Yeah, he goes through some silos and things like that, but he's on a farm. He knows who's in what and who's not going to get hurt in that sense. He grew up in this area. And this was always a good touch. It's not an original thing either, but to have Zod having issues with honing his senses because he didn't grow up here, I always like that in a Superman story, because that's another really basic part. It's hard to be Superman in that sense because he's always having to suppress everything, even just to live. I mean, it's not like he's doing it because he doesn't want the powers. He's always having to hone his hearing. He's always having to hone his senses. He's always having to hold back in his strength just to, open a door or to hug someone or anything. So, or even when he saves someone and he catches them from midair, if he's not careful, he could very easily crush them and kill them. But yeah, this is where his suit starts to look real good in the movie. He has another moment later on after the destruction of part of Metropolis that it starts to wash out. It definitely depends on the lighting and the day they were shooting, what Zack Snyder was trying to get. The less he dampened the colors, the better I thought it looked. But here it looks, this is probably the best it looks in the movie, is in these scenes. And it's just my favorite version. It's the changes they made to it, I thought made it look worse, cheaper, and just overall not as strong. And Hardy does have some good moments here. He does show that he does have purpose in this movie, but I don't know. It's just there's something about some of these side characters that they're interesting and they're pretty cool. But I don't see where the giant focus has to be in them sometimes. I don't know. And technically in this movie, Superman does the three things that they mention in a lot of the older Superman stuff. He is faster than a speeding bullet. He just dodged a couple bullets over there. He got hit by some too, but he outran them. He's more powerful than a locomotive. They throw a train at him at the end of this fight. Able to leap tall buildings in a single bound. He doesn't really do that, but he does jump as high as he could to leap over a building when he first learns to fly. This is also pretty messed up. The jet before that, when I don't remember who the big guy's name is, but when he jumps up on the jet and pulls the guy out, the dude literally, you see him like turn into just a meat paste as he pulls him out of the seat. It's actually it's a very like gruesome death. They don't. It's so fast that you don't really notice. But if you go back to that first jet he destroys and pulls the guy out, the dude just like splits apart. It's pretty. If you like freeze frame it, you're like, whoa. Oh, I think this is a good fight. This fight, I think in Smallville is better than he doesn't really fight, I guess, in Metropolis besides fighting Zod, and that I actually enjoy. But this whole moment, I was just waiting for a Superman movie like this, because the only fighting we saw in live action with Superman was in actually like besides Superman 3 and 4, in Superman 2 he fights Zod and Ursa and all them, but it's so at the time with the limitations they had, it looked so corny. It was like almost like unintentional slow-mo just to show how hard they hit, but you couldn't see the impact. And Superman Returns, he doesn't throw one punch, and I don't have a problem with that. I don't think Superman always has to, but it was kind of a nice itch that needed to be scratched for however many years, to see him just really get pounded on by others like just as strong as him, and to also see him lay out some hurt that's pretty Superman worthy. And I think the use of heat vision in these movies is pretty good. The one thing I don't ever like, which they don't do much in this movie, but the one new style that they've been doing, which I think they've actually, now I think about it, gotten rid of it a little bit more because they got criticized for it, but I was getting really tired of every single shot of Superman in a comic book or in anything. He always had to have glowing red eyes from his heat vision. I think they thought it made him look more badass and everything, but that got really old real quick. I think the only time I truly liked that was in some of the covers for Superman Earth 1. Those are ones that people criticized a lot, but I actually didn't mind. But there's so many shots now of Superman with his red eyes, and they're like, oh, look how badass that looks, and it bothers me. This is a pretty good moment too. and the way they fight, it's so, people actually compare it to like Dragon Ball Z, and I would agree. It's very like, she moves so fast. Why would you want to go any slower? You just fly right through these people, literally. And I really dig that. It's pretty badass, and also makes sense. And their little back and forth is pretty good. Some of the CG with the fighting doesn't age super well. Um, but it's still cool to see, like that, like him punching him into that giant train yard. Like, some of the moments where you see him getting grabbed, you're like, that's obviously CG, but it's not any worse than Superman Returns. There's some moments in that movie where it's like, it might as well be the video game. But even in like Batman v Superman, the CG I think is really well used. It's much more stylized than this. I'll give it that. Zack Snyder kind of just embraced what one of his favorite parts of filmmaking, which is having those really specific styles. But when doing that, it blends in the CG a little bit more seamlessly. A lot of people would disagree, but yeah, there's the train he gets hit with. More powerful than a locomotive, because he escapes. Now, I can see how some of this here can get a little, the pacing can get a little slower. I think some people had some gripes with the back end of this. You know, there's a fight, and then there's a big break, and then there's like two more fights. Yeah, I can see that too. Like I said, I just enjoy it because of it does scratch an itch for me to see a lot of action in a Superman movie, like this kind of action. And look at his suit there. That's my favorite. The light that bounces off the edge of the S looks like almost gold. It's pretty cool. And this scene is definitely a really like a nice touch to see the military kind of trusting him and working with him. And that's always cool too, the way he takes off in these movies. He doesn't just like gently float away. I don't think he always has to do that, but it's cool to see in this. This is a sweet moment though. The nice suits, and that's a nice line. I love how the dog is just sitting out there like, just like, this sucks. I'm just like hanging out here. House is destroyed. Cute dog. But yeah, it was very jarring to see this Lois approaching him and saying Clark, and he's in his Superman suit at his mom's house, and I love it. It's a nice new perspective on those characters. But it was just, I remember seeing it the first time, like, that's so weird. Like, for his origin, she already knows. It gets irritating though after a while, Lois not knowing. And it makes her dumb. But yeah, this whole the codex is in Clark's blood is an interesting concept. They just don't do anything with it. And I know they're trying, can we extract it and all this, but like I think that would have been a nice touch to bring that back for Justice League and kind of recall that moment, because it's not used for anything else, and they kind of don't talk about it again. I remember everyone, like Kevin Smith was like, he gets to say some cool lines like "release the world engine." That is quite the name. But one of the biggest gripes, obviously, people have with this movie is how there's so much destruction, and how Superman is just, he's Mr. Destroy Man in this movie. If you watch this, he is not at fault for any of this destruction. The world engine does the majority of it, and he's the one who takes it down. No one else could. Yes, was it tough? Yeah, and it was tough, and it took him a while, so there was a lot of damage done, but you got to give him credit for doing it because no one else would. And then the fight with Zod. The only other thing that people blame is when he uses the heat vision in the ship and he makes the ship crash in the city. That one I can give to him, but I don't think that kind of fits, I think, part of the whole character aspect of it too. It's like, how else is he going to stop it? I mean, I guess he could fly in front of it and try to stop it from the outside, but he's not that Superman yet. He doesn't know how to handle situations yet. He's been Superman for less than a day, and he's already having to go up against one of the biggest threats that Superman has in the comic books. And so, all things considered, it's an interesting moment to me. But when they have this fight between Superman and Zod's the one throwing him into stuff. Superman is not throwing Zod around into stuff. The other thing I can think of is when the gas line that has LexCorp on it or whatever is pushed at him, he jumps over it instead of stops it. But yet again, that's another moment that I could chalk up to, which is, I'm not trying to make an excuse. I get, maybe they should have represented that differently, but for me, I just think of it as, he's still inexperienced. He doesn't understand that yet. He doesn't understand the consequences of doing, every reaction he makes as Superman is intentional, because it always saves an extra life. In the comic books, everything he does, one change in decision making, one way of stopping something could cost lives, and he doesn't get that yet. He's not experienced enough yet to get that. And I'm glad that they do kind of soften this whole shocking, destroying a big chunk of the city in Batman v Superman by making it being a catalyst for Batman hating Superman. And kind of seeing from the ground the chaos ensuing. It they don't polish past it. Like in this movie, they act like, oh well, and everything's fine and good after this is over. But when you get to Batman v Superman, you can tell they took the criticism, because there are consequences to fighting in the city like that, and there are consequences to him not reacting in certain ways. This scene has a really bad writing exposition moment where they're just explaining everything like a black hole. Yes, exactly, precisely. Like, let's talk to the audience and give them all of this explanation before we go into the final part of the movie. But the thing I do like about it is Henry Cavill talking about it, because he sounds a lot like he has the Superman down at this point when he's walking and explaining. That's when I'm like, ooh, this is very much a Superman moment. Like the confidence in his voice and everything is very good. that's the other thing, that this whole next chunk, he's fighting across the world, trying to destroy the world engine, and it makes him weaker. This whole thing, I mean, he's getting tested to his limits, and if this were Superman, 5 or 6 years into being Superman, I could understand why this would be annoying. But it's literally like the day of he's Superman, and all this is happening due to him showing up and trying to figure out who he is. This is a good shot of him flying back to Earth. I love that because even in like a lot of flying games, like whether it's with planes or whether it's, like Superman or something, every time I try to get somewhere, I don't go straight for it. I go high up and then I dip down onto it. No Man's Sky, I do that too, where you'll be flying to a planet and you got to get to the other side. You go out into space, then you come back down onto it because it's faster. And I like how they do that with Superman there. And it's just a cool shot. God, that's such a close-up of his eyes. You can see his pores on his face. But I like how they're showing his, like, trying to focus by, like, twitching his eyes, like his eyelids like that. But yeah, I'm glad that they do this, where at this point I was like, okay, we've had enough Jor-El. Like, Jor-El is most effective when you get who he is in a matter of, 10 minutes. The more you hold on Jor-El and his beliefs and how he talks everything, the more it starts to fall apart, because the more you try to relate him to his son. And I don't think that's a good way to do it. That's a good shot too of him flying. But so by this point I was definitely like, okay, we need to, I really hope that like he's not going to just be a supporting character in all these Superman movies, which they didn't make. But luckily they destroy the thing that has him appear more. See, now I just want to, like, I'm just sitting here watching it because it's a lot of action, and the philosophy behind it isn't as deep, but it's also just visually pleasing for me. I like Perry in this too for that reason. I like how he's very protective of his staff. First, not always, but in a lot of versions of Superman in the comics and in the movies and everything, he's a tough, hard ass at the planet. And then whenever there's danger, they always show him kind of being either kind of cowardly or as a joke, kind of like a J. Jonah Jameson kind of type. Zod hits him in his head in the ceiling, and he faints in Superman 2, things like that. And this, I really like how he really cares about his staff, and he's really proactive to help. There's a moment coming up where Jenny gets stuck under rubble, and they have to pull her out. And there's a moment where she's like freaking out, and he's like trying to comfort her, and they're trying to save her, and they're about to die. And then Superman comes in and save it. It makes me choke up every single time I see it, because it's like the pinnacle moment of Superman that I love. It's like everything about it. It's like just when you think things are going to go bad, just when you think everything's hopeless and there's nothing you can do about it, and you just have to go with what you got, he comes in and he says, no, I'm going to make this better. They don't deserve that. Every time. It's just something that, being a Superman fan all my life, every time I see it, I get a little choked up, and it's so nerdy and it's so ridiculous, but it happens every time. I can't explain it. But to have Zod with a plan of turning Krypton into, or turning Earth into Krypton, and being staunch on it, he has the reasons behind it. All of the reasons that his plan is flawed and doesn't make sense, I don't think is a plot hole, and I do not think are. I think they're stupid, but it's because of he's a flawed character. His reasoning shouldn't make sense. His plan should have a very shallow outcome to it, because that's why there's a disagreement, and that's why it can't happen. I mean, it's more than just you don't want millions and billions of people dying. It's just also on a fundamental scale, he's wrong. He's not thought it through, and that's a problem of his genetic combination. But this fight with this giant robot is actually kind of cool. It's like, it's so like sci-fi / such a classic Superman thing they do, where he fights something bigger than him, and it's not just a person. And I love the intellectual fights too, not just he doesn't always have to use his fists or his strength to be Superman. I get that, but here it comes here soon. It's the moment where his face looks more like Christopher Reeve than it does Henry Cavill. This moment here, though, this whole chunk here, and like the next, I don't know, minute or two, always gets me. I mean, come on. When you see just like his hand, like you haven't seen him for a few minutes, and he got sucked into that thing, and you just see him standing there, and you see his fist go, every time, man. Ugh. And they're like resolute. I mean, like that part alone for me personally um, sells the movie for me. I know not everyone agrees, but for me personally, that's something that I'm like, that does it. Now the whole he did it and then her smiling back at him, that is a little too much, I think. I think could be I mean, I like it, and I don't think it's the corniest thing ever, but it's, from a movie perspective, it's very much like, you don't have to tell us. I know he's telling her, but and that's another thing that always gets me when it comes to Superman movies or anything, or even comics, whatever, is him getting re-energized from the sun. That's my favorite moment in Superman Returns, is when he gets stabbed by a kryptonite, they get it out of him, and he flies up into the sun. Oh, that always is something that's super visually stunning, and also, if you have the right music behind it, it's really powerful, at least in my opinion. Now this whole, I can't get the key in because you got to spin the thing or turn the thing over, that is very much a cop-out to just keep the tension high. And it's not something that, like, I get they want more tension, they want them to not succeed as quickly, but it's very shoehorned in and kind of forced. him in his armor sitting in that seat, he looks like Brainiac, like wired into the entire ship or something. He looks so big. Some of the CG of him in his armor, that's a good shot too with the music, and he's last minute, I'm coming to save. But CG of Zod's armor sometimes doesn't hold up as well as it used to. But even though this leads to him crashing the ship into the city, I like I like it. I like the message, not necessarily the message behind it. I just like how it's like he's doing what he can to stop everybody. It does do a lot of damage, but he's not thinking about it. He's not used to having to think like that. And like I said, the best part about Superman is he knows every move he makes is intentional, and it's all for a very specific reason. But it's all like, you just got to turn it. Like, that just comes out of nowhere. I don't really get why. I wish they would have found some other way to keep the tension high besides just that. It's just so random. It's like, I can't get my computer to start. Oh, you just got to wiggle the plug a little bit. It's like not interesting. But this is badass. Her like just taking everybody out in the ship. She doesn't get enough credit for her role. They don't talk about her role enough when they like rank villains, and they like, she's real good. She's scarier to me than Zod, and I like Zod a lot, but like she's just like this unstoppable force. That's a cool shot of the key with the symbol. I just is a cool, like, I don't know, the lighting on it is interesting to me. It's just visually cool. And this is another, just this moment also gets me, just Superman saving Lois, like, without hesitation, looks up, boom. But he saved that soldier in the Smallville fight. And, overall, he saved more people than killed them. And I'm not making excuses for that. Like, I have my explanations, like I said. But this is just cool. He gets out of the rubble, and then it's like... Phew. Another thing that Kevin Smith talked about is that shot there of her looking up as they're flying away. The absolute terror. He said that was one of his favorite moments. I agree. That's something that... looking at is a nice touch. It's very good visual acting off of an actor, and I think it's really just the scope that they make this look. I mean, yeah, there are a lot of people probably died. I'm not. They kind of say that in the Batman v Superman, but it's not as much of the city. If you look at a pan out, the city's massive. Metropolis in this is huge. It's like the size of an entire state. But so I think what he was intending is it's supposed to be like, I don't know, a couple blocks completely destroyed with quite a few people who probably died from it. But I don't think it's as barren as they make it look in this shot, because this is a big empty space and all the buildings around it are damaged. But yeah, I don't think it's as big as everyone imagines it. That's kind of it's not really I don't think that joke it fits very well. Say it's all downhill after the first kiss. And here we are. This is the last fight, which when I saw this movie, a lot of people thought differently than I did. I like that shot too, but when I saw this movie, I was like, I want to see him like actually go toe to toe with Zod, and they're not going to do that, are they? He's just going to stop them, and they're going to go away. And a lot of people were mad when this happened, like, oh my god, that was so much like mind-numbing action. Now we got another action scene. But I wanted this. I really wanted to see them go toe to toe, because it's such an iconic villain duo, and or it's just such an iconic fight between the two, and I just wanted to see that. So I was actually really happy, and this is one of my favorite tracks on the CD as well. If You Love These People is what it's called on the track of the Man of Steel soundtrack. It is amazing. It's one of my favorites. And it sounds so different compared to so many Superman things I've seen that it blew my mind when I saw it. I was like, oh my God, this is exactly what I'm looking for in a Superman movie. It scratched so many itches for me. But yeah, Michael Shannon's Zod armor doesn't hold up as well, the CG of it. He looks actually, and I have to admit, even though it does look not very good, you still see that with Iron Man when Tony Stark's walking around without his helmet. His CG looks just like Michael Shannon's CG in this. Even in the newest Endgame trailer they released for tickets being released, it was the same. It looked just like that. His head just looks like it's floating off of his body. They still quite haven't perfected that yet. So all things considered, it doesn't look too bad. Not a big fan of that. I like the heat vision aspect, but I don't like the let's show it 3 times. That seems kind of amateur to me, but this all's good. But that's like the core build. That's the Wayne building, I'm pretty sure, from Batman v Superman. And see, all this is not from Superman. That building was from Zod. This is the moment they talk about, and you got the LexCorp tanker or whatever it is, and he just jumps over it, and it blows up all that behind him. But he looks back at it like, oh, like, he's like, oh, I shouldn't have, like, it distracts him because he's still not used to any of this. And so as he's doing this, he's learning each action has a consequence. Like, the CG there doesn't look very good with his armor. Then they get rid of the armor and it looks fine the rest of the movie. But there too, even that little bit of the building, the facade, the only thing that he does also is he does push Zod's face into a side of a glass building in a little bit here. But that also, like, it doesn't destroy the building. I don't think it would kill anybody. I like that. The clash. But yeah, the CG here is also a little rough. I remember just recently seeing this little part where he's taking it off, and it just doesn't... He seems like he's floating. His head's floating on top of all that armor. But like I said, just like Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man, that happens still. It's just I think it's just a tough thing to do. Make it look realistic. But I was also like, oh, cool, he took off his armor, so like they have like a kind of yin and yang look now. Like, he doesn't need like that big ass armor. I don't know. I think this song here, this is If You Love These People, when he comes and attacks him, and I was like, oh, this is what got me really excited. I was like, ooh, this is new territory in Superman movies that I haven't seen, that I'm really happy with. It really got my adrenaline going. And then there's the end, the controversial end of Superman killing. And I'm not going to talk too much about it here. There's so many people that talk about it. And, yeah, I know that it was they talk about how it was the intention is what if Superman was in a no-win scenario of, that's his only choice. And I don't think that's how I see it necessarily. I think it is that to an extent, but I see it more as he I see that I think the problem people have with it isn't a no-win scenario. Like, they could have definitely done something different physically with them to literally make it a no-win scenario, but the way they have him in the headlock and things, he could have done other things. But what it comes down to is that Superman chooses to make a sacrifice for humanity over his birthplace. And by snapping Zod's neck, that was his last hope to bring his heritage back fully, and at least as far as he knows. And so this is more, it's not literal, it's not as literal as you should take it. The physicality of it is just to get to that point and to show this is his choice. Does he want to stand with the human race or be against it? And they kind of say that with Jonathan as well, and this is his choice. And Superman doesn't snap Zod's neck and they go, ha, they got him, and scoff it off and walk away. He is torn. He's broken, and he instantly breaks down from it, because not only did he just lose his last chance of being with someone like him, but he also, it shows how much he doesn't want to do that again, how haunting it is. They would not show Zod, they wouldn't make it look that horrific for just the sake of it looking badass. It's not. They do it because they show how horrific it was to see him. He watched death in his own hands, and he hates it, tears him apart, and it's kind of a good reason as to why he would never go that route again, no matter the circumstance. The only thing I wish they would have done is, after that, shown something like in the Avengers, where they show clips of the news of destruction and the people's reactions and the memorials in place and things like that. Instead, they just skip right to this, and that's an editing problem, and that's also it's also Zack Snyder's fault probably too, because he probably didn't film anything like that. But they should have added, just like a 30-second showing clips of people like that. It would have really shown how drastic that was, how big of a deal it was. Right when you go to this, and then you instantly go to the end of the movie, you don't look at the repercussions from it. Luckily, Batman v Superman came out and they showed the repercussions of that. But if they hadn't have made another movie after this, that would have been a big, big, big flaw. In this whole, I just think he's kind of hot. Like, that's such like a Michael Bay. That's like such a Michael Bay moment. Like, I get they're trying to add some levity into it and whatnot, but you can do it in other ways. Now, the ending of this movie, I think, is about perfect, in my opinion. I love how it ends. I love how it ends with the flashback to him with a cape, and I know everyone's like, well, how would he wear a cape before there was a Superman that existed? What inspired him to do that? More people wore red capes than Superman in history, and I think it's also the idea of, a superhero, the generic superhero you think of as someone with a cape flying around or saving people, and it just is a nice touch. I just think it looks cool, and I think it's well shot, and it's cute, and it's charming. This part choked me up a little bit when I first saw it, because they play that great piano music, and then but I love that, and I love how like he looks at him kind of embarrassed, but that's great. And then all the way up to the Daily Planet stuff, I think it's also it ends on a perfect note for me, because up until this point I completely forgot about the Daily Planet, like him being like needing an alter ego, because the Clark is so human in this and so natural that he doesn't, and you don't, Lois knows who he is from the get-go. You don't have to have that disguise throughout, and you don't have to play that game throughout, but he has to get to that point somewhere when he wants to fit in with society. And so it's perfect that they give it to him at the end. And it's just how in most stories they'll show the biggest reveal at the end of the hero, being confident and flying away. They end it with a very kind of grounded scenario of him becoming Clark Kent, which I think is a nice touch. Lombard's also in the books, the comic books, and he's kind of a sleaze, but he has good intentions. And I like the Clark Kent that he portrays too. He doesn't do the Christopher Reeve thing, which I love, but he didn't copy him in any way. He's more of the comic book Clark that is kind of just a shadow. He doesn't stick out too much. He's just a very average guy, but he's not just a straight bumbling nerd either. I like that choice. I think it's a good way to go about it. But yeah, I just thought that was a perfect punctual ending to Man of Steel. So that's Man of Steel, and it's not a Marvel movie, so there isn't any after credit stuff that comes later. That's just it, and that's all we got. And I remember seeing that in theaters, and there's a huge applause. Superman movies are besides like Infinity War, Superman movies are some of the only movies I've ever seen where at the end there was applause. I'm not saying it's the only one ever, but leave it in the comments if you know any other movies you've been to that you've seen applause at the end, because I'm sure there are more. But both Superman Returns and Man of Steel, I remember seeing at the very end there was a huge applause and cheering. I guess Star Wars did that too. Star Wars was another one that's pretty big with that. But there's definitely a big want for Superman movies. There's definitely a buzz about them that people want to be excited for them, and people want to see them, and they want to make it a big thing. But I just think, as much as I like this movie, they really need to, the perfect Superman movie hasn't come out yet. It hasn't come out since 1978. And I think when that happens, and it may take a while, it may not be part of the DCEU, but at some point a Superman movie will come out, and it'll be everything people want in a Superman movie. People are just clamoring they have it in their head exactly what they're looking for. And I think this is an interesting step, and for me it had a lot of that. But I still, in the general audience, I still think they haven't found that yet. And when you get that, and when it comes, I think everyone's going to be super excited for it. So that's really all I got to say. I've been talking for like over 2 hours, and I'm exhausted. My voice hurts, and I have to pee. So that's Man of Steel. I hope you enjoyed it. If you haven't seen it in a while, I hope you enjoyed kind of revisiting it, whether you like it or not. I hope that you got a few new things out of it. I hope some of the things I said were at least interesting. I hope, even if you disagree with me on a lot of it, I hope some of it had you look at it in a different light and see, I kind of see kind of where that comes from, just like I see why people don't like it. The Man of Steel. Next up, we're going to do Batman v Superman. It's going to be a lot longer. We're gonna do the 3-hour cut. We're going to do the ultimate cut. That's the only way you can do it. It's the only way you can dissect it. And I'm going to have to recuperate for a little bit before I go to that one, because that one's going to be the toughest one. Not because I don't enjoy it, because I actually do, but it's just a long movie, and it's going to take a lot of talking, and there's a lot more to discuss, and a lot more controversies to bring out in the open and things like that. So look forward to that. That'll be coming out in the next few weeks. But until then, this has been StrandedJay, and this is the first part of the DCEU commentary watch through with Man of Steel. Thanks.